My husband died 2 years ago. Last Sunday, I sat 3 rows behind him in church. I had not planned to be there at all. The First Grace Methodist on Clover Street was not my congregation. My church, the one Robert and I attended together for 31 years, was 12 miles across town. I drove to Clover Street that morning only because my oldest friend, Patricia, had called the week before, asking me to come witness her granddaughter's baptism. A small thing, she said. It would mean the world to her. I put on my good navy dress, the one I wear when I want to feel like myself again, and I drove across town on a cold February morning because grief had not yet stolen my ability to show up for the people I loved. I slid into a pew near the back, nodded at Patricia across the aisle, and opened the program without really reading it. The choir was singing something slow and warm, the kind of hymn that fills a room the way wood smoke fills a house, settling into every corner before you realize it has arrived. I let myself breathe. Those first few months after Robert passed, I could not sit still in a church without crying through the whole service. 2 years had softened that. Most Sundays now, I could make it to the closing prayer before the tears came. I considered that progress. The pastor invited the congregation to be seated. I looked up. 3 rows ahead of me and slightly to the left, a man settled into his pew with the particular motion of someone who has sat in the same spot many times before. He tugged at the sleeve of his jacket, rolled his left shoulder once, the small, private gesture of a person working out a familiar stiffness. I watched him the way you watch a stranger in a crowd, without intention, without meaning to. Then he turned his head to speak to the woman beside him. I stopped breathing. The jaw, the slope of his nose, the way his left ear sat just slightly higher than his right, something so small most people never noticed. Robert used to joke that God assembled him in a hurry and ran out of symmetry. I used to kiss that ear while he pretended to be annoyed. I told myself it was not him. I told myself grief plays tricks on the mind and that I was not the first widow to see her husband in the face of a stranger. I looked down at my program. I read the same line 4 times without absorbing a single word. When I looked up again, the man laughed at something the woman beside him had said. A short, lopsided sound, the left side of his mouth pulling higher than the right. Robert's laugh. The laugh I had heard across dinner tables and living rooms and hospital waiting areas for 31 years. The laugh that used to reach me from the garage on Saturday mornings when he was listening to the radio and thought no one could hear him. My program slid from my fingers onto the floor. The woman in the pew beside me retrieved it quietly and pressed it back into my hands. I did not thank her. I could not speak. My eyes had not moved from the back of his head. I watched him for the entire service. I catalogued him the way you catalog evidence, the way I used to grade papers, carefully, without letting emotion interfere. The silver in his hair was more than I remembered. He had lost weight, perhaps 15 pounds, but the set of his shoulders was the same. The way he held the hymnal slightly lower than everyone else, because he never needed to read the words. Robert knew every hymn by heart. He said his mother had drilled them into him before he could read. When the pastor invited the congregation to stand, the man stood and rested his left hand on the pew in front of him. I leaned forward without realizing it. His ring finger. There was no wedding band, but there was a pale band of skin where a ring had sat for a long time, lighter than the rest, a shadow left by habit and years. I had held that hand for 3 decades. I knew its geography better than my own. I stood on unsteady legs. My pulse was louder than the organ. After the service ended, I did not find Patricia. I did not stay for the reception in the fellowship hall. I followed him. He walked to the parking lot with the woman, speaking to her in a low voice. She was younger than me by perhaps a decade. Blonde hair cut short, sensible coat, a laugh that came easily. He opened her car door before going around to the driver's side. Robert always did that. 31 years. He never once let me open my own car door when he was present. I used to tease him about it. He used to say his mother would come back from heaven to scold him if he stopped. They drove a gray sedan out of the lot. I followed in my car, 3 lengths behind, my hands gripping the wheels so tightly my knuckles ached. They drove for 11 minutes. I counted the traffic lights. They turned into a neighborhood of older homes, with wide porches and mature oak trees, the kind of street that looks the same in every decade because nothing there ever needs to prove itself. They pulled into the driveway of a cream-colored house with dark green shutters and a wind chime near the front door. He carried 2 grocery bags from the trunk that I had not noticed before. She unlocked the door. They went inside together like 2 people who had been doing exactly this for years. I parked halfway down the block. I sat in my car for a very long time. Robert Allen Whitfield died on a Thursday morning in March 2 years ago. His car went off Route 9 near the river bridge during a rainstorm. The vehicle was recovered. The water was fast and cold. They searched for 4 days. When they found him, the funeral director gently suggested a closed casket. His sister Diane handled most of those arrangements. She said I had enough to carry, and I should let her take care of it. I let her. I sat outside that cream-colored house, and I thought about all of this. I thought about the Thursday morning a police officer knocked on my door and how my knees went before he finished the first sentence. I thought about the casket and how I pressed my palm to the wood because I could not bring myself to open it. I thought about Diane holding my hand through the whole service, squeezing twice when the pastor said Robert's name. And I thought about the man who had just walked through that front door with grocery bags in his hands and a pale ring of absent skin on his left finger. I drove home. I did not trust myself to do anything else. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off for a long time before I turned on the lamp. I pulled out the box I kept on the shelf in the closet, the one with photographs, Robert at our daughter's college graduation, squinting in the sun, Robert at Christmas 3 years back, holding a mug with both hands the way he did when something was too hot, Robert and me at a restaurant the summer before he died, both of us slightly blurred because our son had never mastered the camera on his phone. I looked at these photographs for 2 hours. Then I took out my own phone and looked at the photographs I had taken through my windshield in that church parking lot. The resolution was poor. My hands had not been steady, but in 3 of the images, his profile was clear enough. The jaw, the ear. I did not sleep. I called my daughter the next morning. Claire lived 4 hours away and had her father's stubbornness and her mother's ability to organize a crisis. I told her what I had seen. There was a long silence. "Mom," she said, "it has been 2 years. Grief does things to the mind. I know you miss him. I know what I saw," I said. Another silence. Then, more carefully, "Do you want me to come?" "Not yet," I said. "I need to be certain first." I drove back to Clover Street Methodist that Wednesday evening for their midweek service. I sat in the parking lot and waited. He arrived at 6:40 with the same woman. I photographed them walking in. I photographed him standing under the light of the entrance, full face, clear. That night I sat with the old photographs and my new ones side by side for 3 hours. The scar on his chin from the bicycle accident when he was 12. It was there, a small crescent, almost invisible unless you knew to look. I knew to look. I had kissed that chin 1,000 times. On Thursday, I called Diane. Robert's sister was 2 years younger than him and had always been the family member I was closest to. When my mother passed 8 years ago, Diane drove 6 hours to sit with me for 4 days. When Robert and I went through a difficult season early in our marriage, it was Diane who told me that her brother loved me and was too proud to say how much. I trusted her the way you trust someone who has sat beside you in the hard moments without being asked. I invited her to lunch. She suggested a place near her office, a quiet Italian restaurant we had been to many times. When she sat down across from me, her eyes were warm, and her smile was the smile I had known for over 30 years. I ordered coffee. I watched her hands. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I have been better," I said. Something happened this week. I told her about the church. I kept my voice even. I described what I had seen: the laugh, the jaw, the scar, the pale band on the ring finger. I watched her face while I talked. Diane was a composed woman. She had worked in hospital administration for 20 years and knew how to hold her expression still. But when I mentioned the scar, something moved behind her eyes, a tightening, quick and controlled. If I had not been watching for exactly that, I would have missed it. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "Honey," she said, "I understand why you saw what you saw. Losing someone changes the way we perceive things. Our minds want them back so badly that sometimes we find them in strangers." I looked at her hand on mine. "Did you see his body?" She withdrew her hand slightly. "I handled the arrangements," she said. "You know that. That is not what I asked." I kept my voice very quiet. "Did you see his body, Diane?" Her coffee cup clicked against the saucer. She did not answer immediately, and that pause was an answer. "I flew home alone," she said finally. "The accident was very bad. The condition of the remains was difficult. I made the decisions I thought were best for you." I nodded slowly. I thanked her for lunch. I said I would call her soon. I drove home and I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. Diane had not answered my question. She had walked carefully around it the way someone walks around a place where the floor is weak, knowing exactly where not to step. My son Daniel was 29 and worked as a contractor in the same city where his father and I had lived our whole lives. I did not call him that week. Robert and Daniel had been close in the particular way that fathers and sons sometimes are. All surface and very little said aloud, but steady. Daniel had taken his father's death hard. I did not want to upend him with something I could not yet prove. Instead, I spent 4 days making quiet decisions. I found a private investigator through a referral from a woman at my former school. A no-nonsense woman who had used one during a custody dispute and called him thorough. I drove to his office on a Tuesday morning, and I sat across from a man in his late 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the unhurried manner of someone who had heard many extraordinary things and was not easily startled. I told him everything. Not the grief, not the 31 years, but the facts: the accident, the closed casket, the church, the photographs, the house on the street with oak trees, the scar, the laugh, the ring finger. I handed him the photos I had taken and watched him study them. "If what you are describing is accurate," he said, "this is a significant legal matter. Identity fraud, possible financial crimes. This will take time, and it will not be inexpensive." "I can manage that," I said. He named a figure. I did not flinch. I wrote the check. "I need you to find out who he is living as now," I said. "Bank records, property records, how long he has been in that house, and whether there was any financial activity in my husband's accounts before the accident." He looked at me over his reading glasses. "You have done some thinking about this. 2 years of grief clears the mind," I said. Over the next 10 days, I returned to my routine. I went to my own church. I had dinner with Patricia and did not mention what I had seen at Clover Street. I watered my plants and read in the evenings and did all the ordinary things a 63-year-old retired schoolteacher does to fill the hours. But underneath all of it, something had changed. The weight I had been carrying for 2 years had not grown lighter. It had simply shifted into a different shape. Less like sorrow and more like resolve. The investigator called on a Friday afternoon. "I have the report," he said. "You should come in." The folder was dense. He walked me through it page by page. The man in the cream-colored house had been living under the name Gerald Harmon for 26 months, 2 months longer than Robert had been dead. Gerald Harmon had a Social Security number registered to a man who had died in a nursing home in Arkansas 4 years ago. The name had been carefully acquired. There were property records, utility accounts, a vehicle registered to Gerald Harmon, a modest bank account opened in that name 18 months ago. Before the accident, the investigator continued, there were significant wire transfers out of your joint accounts. 11 separate transactions over 8 months. The total was just over $340,000. All of it moved to an account that was subsequently closed. I looked at the figure on the paper. Robert handled our finances, I said. I trusted him. Yes, said the investigator. He also carried significant private debt. I found records of loans taken against the business in the 2 years before his death. The business was in worse shape than the public filings reflected. A staged death would have resolved the debt and the divorce proceedings in one motion, without the legal exposure. I looked up. Divorce proceedings. He slid a document across the desk. A consultation record from a family attorney dated 14 months before the accident. Robert's name. The attorney's office was in a county 2 hours from where we lived. He was going to file, the investigator said. Then he did not. Then he decided this was simpler, I said. He nodded. I asked if there was more. He opened to the last section. Phone records. Regular calls between my husband and his sister Diane in the 6 months before the accident. Regular calls between the same 2 numbers in the 12 months after. The most recent call was 11 days ago. The day before I called Diane and invited her to lunch. I closed the folder. How do I make this airtight? I asked. A recorded admission, he said. And access to the financial documents proving the transfers were unauthorized. Do you know where those records might be? Robert kept financial files in his home office. The room had been closed since the accident. I had not been able to bring myself to go in. Now, I was grateful I had not cleared it out. I drove home, and I went into that office for the first time in 2 years. The air was close and still. His reading glasses were on the desk. I did not let myself look at them too long. I went to the filing cabinet and opened it. Everything was organized the way Robert organized everything, alphabetical, clear, thorough. He was meticulous about records. That, at least, he had not changed. I photographed 37 pages of financial documents, account statements, transfer authorizations, loan records, everything the investigator needed. Then I called Diane again. I told her I was struggling. I said something in my voice had not been right, since I saw that man at the church, and I needed to talk it through with someone who had known Robert, someone who understood what losing him had truly meant. My voice was soft. I let it waver in the right places. I had been a schoolteacher for 38 years, and I knew how to modulate a room. She came to my house the following Saturday morning. She brought flowers, tulips, yellow, the kind she always brought. She sat in my living room and she held her coffee mug with both hands, and she was kind. I asked her about Robert. I let her talk about him. She was eloquent and genuine, and for a while I let myself simply listen, because she had known him longer than I had, and some of what she said was true. She had loved her brother. That much I believed. Then, slowly, I moved the conversation forward. I talked about the financial strain after his death, the unexpected gaps in the accounts, how I had found documents I did not understand. I framed each question as confusion, as a widow trying to make sense of numbers left behind by a husband who handled everything. I watched her answer carefully, offering just enough to calm me, steering around the edges. Then I said, I found the transfer records, Diane. All 11 of them. The room went quiet. I need to understand, I said, still gently, still soft. I need you to help me understand what happened. She set down her coffee. She looked at her hands for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were tired. He came to me 2 years before the accident, she said finally. He said the business was failing. He said he did not know how to tell you. He was ashamed. You know how he was about pride. I know, I said. Go on. She told me the rest of it slowly, in the voice of someone who had been waiting a long time to put something down. The debt, the affair, a woman named Caroline he had met through a client 3 years before his death, the plan, which had not been a sudden decision, but a gradual construction. Fake the accident, use a different identity, disappear into a quiet life with Carolyn, and let everything behind him be buried along with a casket that held nothing but the expectations of an old life. You helped him, I said. She closed her eyes. He is my brother. He is my husband, I said. There was a long silence. Did you know about the money? I asked. I knew some of it had been moved. He said it was to protect assets from the creditors. It came from our joint accounts, Diane. My money. My 31 years. I know, she whispered. I put my coffee cup down and stood. I would like you to leave now, I said. She looked up at me with eyes full of something between guilt and grief. Eleanor, she began. My name is Margaret, I said. And I think you know what comes next. She left without the tulips. I stood in my living room after the door closed and I breathed for a long moment. Then I picked up my phone and called the number the investigator had given me for his recommended attorney. The lawyer was a woman about my age, direct and quiet and without any wasted words. When I laid out the documents and played the recording, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at me steadily. This is fraud, she said. Identity theft, financial exploitation, forgery of transfer authorizations. The sister is an accessory after the fact. The question is whether you want to pursue this criminally, civilly, or both. Both, I said. She nodded once, as if she had expected nothing less. We will need to formalize the evidence and file with the district attorney's office. The financial recovery will go through civil court. Given the documentation, your position is strong. Given his ongoing use of a false identity, the criminal exposure is significant. How long? I asked. Weeks. Not months, she said. This is not complicated. It is simply ugly. I can manage ugly, I said. I drove to Clover Street Methodist the following Sunday. I sat in the parking lot and watched him arrive with Caroline. They walked in together. They sat in the same pew. He held the hymnal slightly lower than everyone else. I watched through the windshield until the service ended and they came out again into the pale winter light. I watched him laugh at something, she said. I watched him put his hand briefly on the small of her back. 31 years, I thought. Every morning and every evening and every ordinary hour in between. Then I started my car and drove home. The warrants were issued on a Thursday. I learned about it from my attorney, who called at 7:30 in the morning. Her voice was the same measured tone she used for everything, which I had come to appreciate. He was located at the residence, she said. No resistance. He was taken into custody at 6 this morning. The sister turned herself in voluntarily through her attorney at 8 o'clock. I sat with that for a moment. The financial recovery process has begun, she continued. The remaining transferred funds have been located in an account under the false identity. The civil filing will move forward separately. I thanked her. I put the phone down. My daughter Claire called 11 minutes later. She had driven up 2 days before and was staying in the guest room down the hall. I heard her come into the kitchen and then stop in the doorway when she saw my face. Is it done? She asked. It has started, I said. She came and sat beside me. We did not say much. Claire had inherited her father's quiet way with difficult moments. We sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee in the early morning light and let it be enough. Daniel called in the afternoon. He had heard through people who had seen the news a brief mention online of fraud charges connected to a name and a face that matched his father's. His voice on the phone was shaking. "Mom, is it true?" "Yes," I said. The silence on the other end was the long the kind a person needs before they can say anything worth saying. "I am so sorry," he said finally. "I am so sorry I did not push harder. After the funeral, something never felt right to me. I told myself it was just grief. Grief made it easy," I said. "That was the point." He cried then, not loudly, but I could hear it. My son was 29 years old and he had buried his father twice, once in a cemetery and once all over again on a Thursday morning when the phone rang and told him what had really happened. I let him cry. I did not tell him it was fine. It was not fine, but we would find our way through it. I went to the house with the dark green shutters on a Saturday afternoon. I did not hide. I parked directly in front and I walked to the door and I rang the bell. Caroline answered it. She had the face of someone who had recently been crying and had since become very still. She looked at me with the careful politeness of someone who already knew who I was. "I would like to speak with him," I said. "If he is here, he has an attorney now," she said. "He is not supposed to." "I am not here to discuss legal matters," I said. "I am his wife. I would like 2 minutes." She stepped back without a word. He was in the kitchen. He looked older than I remembered him, thinner than the man I had married. He looked up when I came in, and the recognition was immediate. No pretense this time. No careful confusion. Just Robert looking at me across a kitchen that was not ours, in a house that was not ours, in a life he had built while I was somewhere else learning to breathe without him. "Eleanor," he said, and my name in his voice after all of it, after all of this, was almost more than I could bear. "Margaret," I said. "You have called me Margaret for 31 years." He looked at the floor. "I am sorry," he said. His voice was rough. Those 2 words were not enough, and he seemed to know it. He said them anyway because they were all he had left. "I did not come for an apology," I said. "I came because I wanted you to know something. I wanted you to look at me and understand that I am not broken, that every choice you made to disappear, to erase yourself from my life and take my money and let me stand at a grave for a stranger, every single one of those choices, I have survived them. I am going to keep surviving them." He did not look at the floor again. He looked at me. His eyes were wet. I did not feel sorry for the tears. But I did not feel triumphant either. What I felt was clear. The kind of clarity that only comes when you have stopped waiting for someone else to hand it to you. "What you chose to do with 31 years," I said, "is on you for the rest of whatever time you have. What I choose to do with the rest of mine is only mine." I turned and walked back through the house. Caroline was standing near the front window. She did not speak, and neither did I. I let myself out, and I walked to my car, and I drove away, and I did not look back at the house with the dark green shutters once. The legal process took several months. The criminal case moved through the system with the weight of documented evidence behind it. The financial recovery was not complete. Some of what had been transferred had been spent in 2 years of quiet living, but enough came back to matter. The civil settlement gave me the business assets that had been signed away under forged authorization. My attorney was thorough and without sentiment, and I was grateful for both. Robert was sentenced in the fall. I did not attend. My daughter offered to come with me if I wanted to go. I told her I did not need to be in that room for justice to happen. Justice was happening whether I watched or not. Diane accepted a plea. Probation, community service, a record she would carry. We have not spoken since the morning she left my house. I have thought about that. About 30 years of shared holidays and phone calls and the hand that held mine at a funeral for a stranger. Betrayal is complicated when it comes from someone you genuinely loved. I have not yet decided what I will do with all of that. I leave it sitting on a shelf in my mind, not forgotten, not yet ready to be resolved. My son, Daniel, and I had dinner every Sunday for 3 months after it was over. We did not talk about his father much. We talked about his work and my garden, and a trip I was thinking of taking. He came with me to replace the furniture in the home office, the room I had kept closed for 2 years. We painted it a pale yellow, and I turned it into a reading room. It faces the garden. The light in the morning is very good. I started a volunteer program at the middle school where I taught for 22 years. 2 mornings a week I sit with students who are struggling with reading. They are loud and honest, and they make me laugh in ways I had forgotten I needed. One boy in particular, 7 years old, missing both front teeth, reads with the kind of effort that looks like his whole body is participating. When he gets a word right, he looks up at me like I gave him something. I have not felt useful like that in a long time. I traveled in the spring. My friend Patricia and I drove the coast for 10 days. We stopped when we wanted and did not stop when we did not want to. We ate breakfast at diners and argued pleasantly about which ones had the better coffee. We watched the sun go down over the water twice, and neither of us said anything because some things do not need language. I think about the woman I was the morning I drove to Clover Street for a baptism. The navy dress, the grief I had learned to carry the way you learn to carry anything heavy, by adjusting your posture until it no longer shows. I think about the moment his laugh reached me across the pews, and how my whole body knew the truth before my mind would allow it. I was not wrong to trust what even I knew. 31 years is a long time to know someone, long enough to recognize the sound of their laugh in a crowded room, long enough to know a scar by touch in the dark. I did not imagine him. I simply allowed myself to believe, for too long, that what I knew was impossible. It was not impossible. It was simply the truth. And the truth, once you stop being afraid of it, is the only thing that ever really sets anything free. I still attend church on Sunday mornings, my own church, 12 miles across town, the one with the old wooden pews and the choir that occasionally goes slightly sharp on the high notes. I sit in the same spot Robert and I used to share, 3rd row from the back on the left, because I decided it was my pew before it was ours, and I was not going to give it up. I do not look for him in the faces of strangers anymore. I do not need to. I know exactly where he is and exactly where I am, and for the first time in a very long time, those are two entirely different things. One of us is free. That one is me.